The Pyramid of Doom. A novel by Andy McDermott. Narrated by Gildart Jackson. Copyright 2009 by Andy McDermott. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Bantam Dell, an imprint of the Random House Publishing Group, a division of Random House Incorporated, and was produced in the year 2010 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Prologue. Giza, Egypt. The time-weathered face of the Great Sphinx regarded Macy Sharif impassively as she paced before its huge stone paws. She didn't give the ancient monument so much as a glance in return. In the 2 weeks she'd been here, the Sphinx and the pyramids beyond had all gone from awe-inspiring wonders to mere backdrops for a job that had fallen far short of her hopes. In the first week she had taken hundreds of digital photos and video clips, but now her camera was just a weight in one thigh pocket, untouched for days. How had Egypt, of all places, turned into such a crushing disappointment? From an early age she'd been entranced by her grandfather's stories of the country of his birth, tales of kings and queens and good and evil in the land of wonders, better than any fairy tale because they happened to be true. It was an exotic, romantic world as different from Miami's wealthy Key Biscayne as Macy could imagine, and even as a child she'd been determined that one day she would experience it for herself. But the reality had not lived up to the dream. She stopped pacing, checking the shelters beside the Sphinx's right paw. Still no sign of Berkeley. A glance at her watch, approaching 8:15 p.m., the expedition leader's daily video conference with the International Heritage Agency in New York was due to start then, which gave her less time to catch him than she'd hoped. At 8:30 the nightly sound and light show would begin, a gaudy display of coloured spotlights and lasers cast upon the pyramids and the Sphinx. Berkeley and the senior members of the archaeological team always departed soon after the opening chords boomed from the loudspeakers, leaving the juniors and the local hired hands with the scut work of securing and tidying the excavation. Macy wasn't even sure if Berkeley considered her a junior team member or a mere labourer. Okay, so she had another 2 years of study before she completed her degree, and maybe her grades didn't exactly put her at the top of the class, but she was still an archaeologist. Kind of. Surely that granted her the right to do something more than make coffee and carry rubble. She resumed her pacing, reflected light from the Sphinx's spotlit face casting an orange wash over her pale olive skin. Her surname may have been Egyptian, but her looks revealed her mother's Cuban heritage. She paused to straighten her ponytail, then, at the sound of muffled voices, hurriedly rounded the giant paw to see the team boss emerge from the dig. On their first meeting, she had thought Dr. Logan Berkeley to be attractive, in an academic sort of way. Mid-30s, a swoop of chestnut-brown hair across his forehead, refined features. Then he'd opened his mouth and revealed himself as an arrogant jerk. It was a description she could apply equally to the two men with him. TV producer Paul Metz was squat, barrel-shaped and bearded, with a lecherous gaze that to her distaste Macy often found aimed in her direction. She liked male attention, sure, but not from all men. The other man was Egyptian. Dr. Iyabi Hamdi was a senior official with the Supreme Council of Antiquities, the government agency overseeing all Egypt's archaeological activities. The paunchy, thin-haired Hamdi was technically in charge of the dig, but seemed happy to let Berkeley do whatever he wanted, being more interested himself in getting his face in front of the TV cameras. Macy wouldn't be surprised if, at the moment the long-thought mythical Hall of Records was finally revealed to the world, Hamdi popped up in front of the lens to boast of the crucial part he'd played in its discovery. That broadcast was the current topic of discussion.
So, you're abso-positively 100% sure that you'll crack open the door right on time?
Metz asked in a tone suggesting he thought otherwise.
For the last time, we'll open the vault entrance exactly when I said,
Berkeley told him, his haughty nasal New England voice filled with frustration.
I know what I'm doing. This isn't my first dig, you know?
It's the first one you'll have done live in front of 50 million people, though. And the network won't be happy if their prime-time special is 2 hours of you chipping at bricks. They want to see something spectacular, and so does everyone else. People love this Egyptian crap.
Torn between defending his heritage and staying on good terms with the producer, Hamdi decided on the latter. Dr. Berkeley, can you assure me that we will keep to the schedule?
8 days from now, Berkeley said through clenched teeth, we'll be showing the world something even more incredible than Atlantis. Don't you worry.
He turned towards a nearby portable cabin with a satellite dish on its roof, the team's headquarters.
And, speaking of schedules, it's time I checked in.
Maybe he wasn't in the most receptive mood, but Macy had to take the chance. Dr. Berkeley, have you got a minute?
Only as long as it takes me to walk to the cabin, he snapped, giving her a dismissive look. What is it?
It's about me, said Macy as she kept pace. I was hoping I could get more involved with the actual archaeological work. I think I've proven that I'm up to the job.
Berkeley stopped and turned to face the young woman.
The job? He said, letting out a sarcastic sigh. That says it all, doesn't it? Macy, archaeology is not a job. It's a calling, an obsession, something that drives your every waking thought. If all you want is a job, McDonald's and 7-Eleven are always hiring.
That's not what I meant, Macy began.
The reason you haven't been involved with the main dig, Berkeley interrupted, is precisely that. You haven't been involved. What exactly have you done to earn a place here? The other juniors all have multiple digs on their resumes, and they all graduated with the highest honors. You, his mouth twisted with contempt, charity, fundraising, connections. And good causes or not, I don't appreciate having unqualified undergraduates foisted on me because Renee Montalvo at the UN owed your mom a favor. You ought to be damn grateful to be here at all. Now, go and finish the cleanup. I'm late for my video conference with Professor Rothschild.
He strode into the cabin, slamming the door.
Macy stared after him in shock, then turned to find Hamdi and Metz watching her. Hamdi adjusted his little silk bow tie uncomfortably before going back into the shelter covering the main excavation, leaving her alone with Metz.
"Want a career change?" he said, leering. "I got the numbers of some modeling agencies."
"Get bent!"
She scowled and stormed off around the Sphinx. Ahead, one of the uniformed security contractors was heading up the ramp out of the excavated pit in which the landmark sat. Wanting to be alone, she turned and entered the ruined temple in front of the statue, dropping into the shadows within the broken walls. She sat on a stone block trying to hold her emotions in check. Egypt definitely hadn't matched up to her dreams. Not so much wonder and romance as drudgery, smog, stomach bugs, and hissing, pinching, cat-calling creeps accosting her on the streets. And now she'd just been completely insulted by her boss. Asshole! The lighting changed, dropping the temple of the Sphinx even deeper into darkness. The sound and light show was about to start. After 2 weeks, Macy practically knew the almost comically portentous narration by heart. Normally, she'd be packing away the team's gear during the display, but tonight? "Screw that," she muttered, lying back on the stone. Berkeley could pick up his own stupid tools. Site Security Chief Sifu Gamal quickly traversed the walkway running between the Temple of the Sphinx and the smaller, marginally less ancient ruin to its northwest. At the walkway's end was a guarded gate. Since 2008, the once-open plain of the Giza Plateau had been surrounded by more than 12 miles of high steel and wire fence, partly to restrict the numbers of peddlers hawking trinkets and camel rides to visitors, and partly for security purposes. Egypt was unwilling to risk a repeat of the 1997 massacre of tourists at Luxor. Now the plateau was observed by hundreds of security cameras and members of the tourist police, and all visitors were screened by metal detectors. But there were more fences within, these not to protect tourists from terrorists, but to protect Egypt's treasures from tourists. Access to the interiors of the pyramids was restricted to just a handful of visitors each day, while the Sphinx itself was almost entirely off-limits. and with a major archaeological excavation in progress, the Sphinx compound was even more closely guarded than usual. The sandstone pit containing the statue was bounded to the east by its temple, to the west and south by cliffs where it had been dug out of the desert, and to the north by a modern stone wall supporting a road across the plain. Only those with passes were normally allowed access. But tonight there would be an exception. Gamal reached the gate and waited as the Son et Lumière display began. A couple hundred tourists sat in ranks of chairs beyond the Temple of the Sphinx, watching the spectacle. He would have preferred the meeting to take place much later, after the last display had finished and the tourists and the IHA team had gone, but the man he was expecting was impatient and quick to anger. Approaching headlights, a black Mercedes SUV. This must be his visitor. Since the erection of the boundary fence, traffic through the site was restricted. The first person out was unfamiliar, a rangy, long-haired Caucasian in a jacket of what looked like snakeskin, his straggly goatee doing little to conceal the almost equally scaly roughness of his face. He rounded the vehicle to open the door for another man, like Gamal, an Egyptian. Gamal stepped through the gate to greet him. "Mr. Shaban," he said, "a great honor to meet you again." Sebak Shaban had no time to waste on pleasantries. The dig's behind schedule. Dr. Berkeley said, "Not that dig." Gamal concealed his discomfort as Saban turned to look straight at him. An old burn scar ran across his right cheek, from what remained of his ear to his top lip, the skin rippled and faintly glossy. The scarring had pulled down the outer corner of his lower eyelid, exposing glistening pink tissue within. From his previous encounters, the security chief was convinced that Shaban was well aware of the psychological impact of his injury upon others, favoring them with the unblemished, fairly handsome left side of his face until he wanted to express his disapproval in graphic form with a simple turn of the head. "There was a slight delay, very slight," Gamal said quickly. "Part of the ceiling collapsed. We've already shored it up." "Show me," ordered Shaban, walking to the gate. "Of course, come with me." Gamal glanced questioningly at the other man, who followed them through. "My bodyguard," said Shaban, "and friend, Mr. Diamondback." "Diamondback?" Gamal echoed uncertainly. "Bobby Diamondback," said the bodyguard, his accent a languid yet menacing American drawl. "It's a Cherokee Indian name. Got a problem with that?" "No, not at all," Gamal replied, thinking he looked more like a cowboy than an Indian. He led them along the walkway. "This way, please." Mocking the Sound and Light Show's bombastic narration had slightly lifted Macy out of her black sulk when she spotted the site security chief. From her position in the shadows, only his upper body was visible above the top of the temple's northern wall. There were two other men with Gamal, one an ugly guy with a greasy mullet and a snakeskin jacket, and the other someone she recognized, Mr. Shaban, something like that. She had seen the scar-faced man briefly at the start of the dig. He was connected with the religious organization co-funding it with the IHA. Presumably he was here to meet Berkeley. The trio made their way to the corner of the smaller temple, where Gamal paused and looked towards the Sphinx, almost furtively, Macy thought. The cold stare of the man in the snakeskin jacket swept past her as he surveyed the area, then unexpectedly flicked back. An involuntary shudder ran through her. She had no idea why. She had every right to be there and wasn't doing anything wrong, but by the time the rational part of her mind told the rest of her body to relax, he had looked away again. To Macy's surprise, rather than descending the ramp towards the Sphinx, Gamal hopped across the gap between it and the upper level of the Sphinx compound, disappearing from her view. The other men followed. Weird. The upper temple was more than 1,000 years younger than its larger neighbor, a product of the New Kingdom from around 1400 BC, and while it was in relatively better condition than the Temple of the Sphinx, it was much less important historically. Why was Gamal giving a private tour, in the dark at that? Standing, she saw the tops of the men's heads as they walked towards the temple entrance, and continued past it. Now she was really curious. There was nothing else up there. Where were they going? Macy climbed out of the temple, watching the trio round the ruin above. Some childhood Nancy Drew instinct kicked in, the urge to find out what they were doing, but she resisted it. until shouting came from the Sphinx, Berkeley yelling at an Egyptian labourer who had just dropped a box. Screw it, she thought. If Berkeley was still acting like a jerk, she didn't want to be anywhere near him. Instead, she ascended the ramp and jumped across to the upper temple. Green laser lights flashed above her, projecting hieroglyphics on the pyramids as the narrator sang the praises of Osiris, the immortal god-king of Egyptian legend. Yea, heard it all before, Macy whispered as she peered round the temple wall. Part of the plateau's north end had been cordoned off by orange plastic netting, where repairs were underway on the high wall. A couple of small cabins and a tent-like structure stood among stacks of bricks and piles of rubble. It was such a mundane sight that while Macy had walked past it every day as she entered the Sphinx compound, she'd never actually paid it any attention before. Certainly nobody ever seemed to do any actual work there. There was someone there now, though. As well as the men at the gate, other guards patrolled the compound to make sure no tourists tried to get up close and personal with the Sphinx. But the man waiting for Gamal and the others wasn't patrolling, he was guarding the construction site. The lighting changed, more lasers and spotlights slashing the black sky. The guard watched the display, only turning away when the visitors reached him. Brief words were exchanged, and he let them through the netting. Gamal reached the tent and pulled aside a flap, revealing lights within. His two companions ducked through, and with another furtive backward glance, Gamal followed. Macy jerked back behind the temple wall, wondering if he'd seen her, before realizing how dumb she was being. So what if he had? She peeked out again. The guard was strolling along the netting perimeter, looking bored. Through the gaps around the tent flap, she glimpsed activity within. Then the movement stopped. Macy kept watching, but it didn't resume. What were they doing in there? Unless all three men were squashed together at one end, the tent didn't seem big enough for them to keep out of sight. If anything, it looked empty. But she couldn't see how that was possible. It was right up against the high wall. She noticed something else, though, a faint plume of smoke. No, not smoke, fumes chugging up from the end of a hose. But there wasn't a generator in sight. So where were the fumes coming from? Interest now well and truly piqued, she rounded the corner, keeping low behind a pile of dirt. But she quickly realized that all her stealth was pointless. To reach the construction site, she would have to cross a wide, open space, and unless the guard was blind, he couldn't miss her. Still, in a few moments, maybe he would be blind. She knew what came next in the sound and light show, having heard it every night. The narrator was about to begin his tale of Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid, and the lights would briefly drop to black before illuminating Khufu's monument at full brightness. Macy closed her eyes, waited. The lights went out. She opened her eyes and raced for the tent, only a few seconds before the Great Pyramid lit up like a beacon. Dramatic music thundered from the loudspeakers, the Great Pyramid exploding into view to the northwest. Macy reached the gap in the netting and skidded to a halt behind one of the stacks of bricks. She glanced around it and saw the guard staring at the floodlit structure. She let out a breath, feeling something she hadn't felt since first arriving in Egypt. Excitement. No, that had been more like anticipation, but this was a genuine thrill. This was fun. Holding in a nervous giggle, she looked at the tent. Now that she was closer, she could hear the chug of a generator, but only faintly, and with an odd echo. She checked again that the guard wasn't looking in her direction, then crept to the tent. Nobody was inside. The hell? Macy wondered aloud, slipping in. One end was taken up by a makeshift cubicle of cheap particle board. Since it was little more than 3 feet wide, she doubted Gamal and the others were huddled within. But she lost interest in it when she saw what was at the tent's other end. A trestle table had construction blueprints spread out across it. She recognized the topmost as a plan of the Sphinx compound. What had caught her attention, though, wasn't on the table, but hanging on the tent wall above it. Large color photographs, blow-ups of ancient papyrus scrolls, the same scrolls that had brought her here in the first place. The Hall of Records, a repository of ancient knowledge that was reputedly only surpassed by the Library of Alexandria, had long been considered nothing more than a myth. But a privately funded archaeological dig in Gaza had discovered papyrus pages that described not only the hall itself, but also how to get into it, through a passage that had once descended between the Sphinx's paws. When the pages were scientifically confirmed to be more than 4,000 years old, the hall suddenly became one of the hottest topics in archaeology, and the Egyptian government granted the International Heritage Agency's request to conduct the dig that would confirm whether or not what was said on the scrolls was true. The IHA, Macy knew, had been given 3 scrolls, yet here was a 4th. She moved closer, silently mouthing the words as she translated the hieroglyphics. The ancient language had been taught her by her grandfather, along with Egyptian history and mythology, his hobby eventually influencing her choice of degree. The new scroll said more about the Hall of Records than the IHA had seen, not just its position, but also its contents. Something about a map chamber, a zodiac, that revealed the location of... The Pyramid of Osiris? Macy whispered in disbelief. That was nothing but another of her grandfather's myths, surely. Osiris was a legend predating even the first dynasty of almost 5,000 years ago, and legends didn't have big-ass tombs built for them, only pharaohs. But that was what the papyrus said, the Pyramid of Osiris, the tomb of the god-king. No suggestion that it was a myth. The text seemed as factually descriptive as it was about the Hall of Records. "Whoa," she said as she realized what that meant. If the Pyramid of Osiris was real, then so was the man buried inside it, not a legendary god, but a flesh-and-blood ruler, until now lost in time. If his tomb could be found, it would be one of the greatest discoveries in history. She looked at the plans on the table. The position of the east-west entrance tunnel to the Hall of Records and the IHA excavation were both clearly marked, as was another longer tunnel from the north. It crossed under what was now the modern road and ran, she realized, directly beneath the tent in which she was standing. Macy turned to the wooden cubicle. The panel facing her was hinged, a roughly cut hole acting as a handle. She eased it open. Now she knew where the men had gone. Down. A ladder descended into a shaft, dim lights revealing the bottom more than 20 feet below. The hose expelling the generator's exhaust fumes ran up one corner, the machine now clearly audible, as were voices. Getting closer. Excitement fled Macy, replaced by fear. Someone was running their own secret dig, trying to beat the IHA team into the Hall of Records, trying to find the Pyramid of Osiris for themselves, which meant that if she was caught in here, she was in trouble. What should she do? Tell someone, Berkeley or Hamdi? But Gamal was obviously in on it, and they would believe him over her. She needed proof. Weight in her thigh pocket, the camera. She pulled it out and switched it on. The wait for the lens to extend and the screen to light up had never seemed so long. A rattling sounded from the shaft, someone climbing the ladder. Throat tight with rising panic, Macy took a picture of the 4 papyrus pages, then tipped the camera down to capture the blueprint. Click. "What the fuck?" The shout came from below, the accent American. The guy with the snakeskin jacket had seen the flash. Another shout, the guard outside. Macy heard his footsteps thudding towards the tent. The clattering of the ladder was loud, faster as the man hurried up it. She ran. The guard threw open the tent flap just as Macy burst through, shoving him aside and sprinting for the temple. She was through the plastic netting before he regained his balance. "Hey!" she shouted, hoping someone from the IHA dig would hear her, but her voice was drowned out by the light show's narration. Behind, Shaban screamed orders to catch her. Fright spurred her on. She rounded the ruin. The shadowed maze of the Temple of the Sphinx spread out below, ominously lit in shards of red and green. Someone was on the walkway. "Dr. Hamdi!" Macy cried. "Dr. Hamdi! Help!" Hamdi stopped, looking bewildered as she leapt over the gap to land in front of him. "What is it, Miss Macy, isn't it?" "Back there!" she gasped. "They're digging! They're trying to rob the Hall of Records!" "What? What are you talking about?" Macy looked back as the guard ran around the side of the upper temple, slithering to an uncertain halt when he saw Hamdi. "That guy with the scar, Shaban, he's in charge. He's got a 4th scroll. I took a picture." She thumbed a button to bring up the image. "Look!" Hamdi's expression changed from confusion to shock. "I see. Come with me." He took her by the arm and gripped painfully tightly. "Hey, what?" Macy said, trying to pull free. He squeezed harder. "Let go!" He ignored her. The guy in the snakeskin jacket ran into view. "Bring her up here!" he yelled. Hamdi pulled Macy toward the gap. She thrashed at his face, but he deflected her blows with his free hand. The guard ran toward them. She fired the camera in Hamdi's face. He flinched, dazzled by the flash, and Macy smashed the camera's hard edge against the bridge of his nose. Another strike to his forehead, and she wrenched herself from his grip. The guard leapt across the gap, blocking the way to the Sphinx. Instead, she ran along the walkway and saw the 2 guards from the compound gate rushing at her. They were all in on it! She changed direction, jumping onto the temple of the Sphinx's northern wall and running along it. The ancient weathered stone was uneven beneath her feet. "Get after her!" the American shouted. The first guard followed her onto the wall. The 2 men ahead also changed direction, intending to leap over the ditch, separating the temple from the compound's upper level, and tackle her. The wall was now more than 12 feet high, too far to jump down. Instead, she flung herself off the wall at an angle, just barely reaching the top of a ruined stone pillar 5 feet down, then springing off that, legs flailing, into the darkness beneath. Pain exploded in both her feet as she hit the ground and fell, her phone and some loose change flying from a pocket and skittering away. The guard jumped off the wall after her. The lighting changed, the red highlights on the lower block suddenly vanishing. The man's outstretched foot missed its top. His other shin cracked into the stone's edge, sending him spinning to the unyielding ground. He let out a keening wail as he clutched his injured leg. Macy wasn't feeling much better. Gasping in pain, she stood. Her camera was still clutched in her hand, and fortunately hadn't been damaged in her fall. She shoved it into her deepest pocket as she looked around. She wasn't far from a passage leading to one of the temple's original entrances. Ankles throbbing, she limped into the deeper darkness behind the high eastern wall. She turned the first corner, looking back. A guard was on the north wall, but his attention was on his wounded comrade. He hadn't seen her. She rounded the second turn and crashed to a stop against metal bars. Shit! She'd known there was a gate to keep tourists out of the temple, but it was taller than she'd thought, too high for her to climb. Beyond it, she saw the seated audience, but they were looking up at the brilliantly lit Sphinx, not the unimposing ruin in front of it, and wouldn't hear any shouts for help over the soundtrack's bombastic crescendo. Macy could hear other shouts, though. Her pursuers were in the temple, and she was in a dead end. The shouts got closer. The inner wall facing the gate was somewhat lower than the others, and in the light shining through the bars she could pick out footholds. She scrambled up. All the past hours of gym practice for the cheerleading squad no longer seemed such a chore. She looked over the top of the wall to see the guy in the snakeskin jacket only 10 feet away on the other side, other men spreading out across the temple floor. One ran into the entrance to the passage. Trapped. She pulled herself up and lay flat along the wall's top, holding her breath as her heart pounded. The running man rounded the corner, reached the gate, looked through it. Nobody fleeing the temple, just tourists gawking at the display. "Does anyone see her?" called the American, shining a tiny but bright LED flashlight between the ruined pillars. The shouted replies were all negative. Hamdi and Shaban hurried to him. "She can't have gotten out," said Hamdi, one hand clutched to his nose. "The entrances on this side are all blocked." "Who is she?" Shaban demanded angrily. "One of the IHA team, Macy Sharif. She's just a student." "Student or not, she could ruin the entire plan if she gets out of here," said Shaban. "We gotta find her," the American added. "Fast." "What are you going to do with her, Mr. Diamondback?" asked Hamdi. "What do you think?" There was a metallic sound that froze Macy's blood, a gun's hammer being cocked. "You're going to—" Hamdi trailed off, shocked. "I'm sure as hell not spending the next 20 years in an Egyptian jail 'cause of some little whore of a student." "Dr. Hamdi," said Shaban, "if she gets away, you and Gamal will have to handle Berkeley. Bobby, we need to send people to watch her hotel, the airport, anyone she might go to for help. She's American?" Hamdi nodded. "Use all our contacts there to find out where she lives, and where her family lives. Send people to watch their homes, tap their phones. We have to silence her." "Count on it," said Diamondback. Macy trembled, a terrified nausea churning within her. They were going to kill her. One of the guards called out from the temple's southern end, reporting that the other entrance passage was empty.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?